Hello, friends, and welcome back to the next episode of Life in Black and White and all the shades in between. This is your host, Ivana and Yao. We hope you have a lovely day. Today, we're speaking to Euan MacLean, who is a former teacher and founder of AdParents, who focuses on parent-school relationship. And I'm sure this is something many parents and non-parents even can relate to and are curious about. I certainly am, and I have lots of questions to ask. So let's dive in. Euan, thank you so much for being here. And if you can tell us more about you and your work, that'll be amazing.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Ivana. Hi, Yair. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast and giving me the opportunity to speak about parent-school partnerships. Yeah, I'm a teacher, former school leader, with a real passion for parent-school partnerships. I've been studying parent-school partnerships as part of my doctoral studies for the last 5 years, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. Essentially, I work with schools and early careers teachers in universities as well to really bring people up to speed with how to have stronger, positive parent-school partnerships that are essentially asset-based and coming from a perspective where there's an appreciation of what parents can bring to the table as opposed to what they are perceived to not bring to the table.
So I don't know if spark is the right word, but what led you to this work? Why do you do what you do?
Sure. So when I was doing my postgraduate diploma to become a teacher, so when I was studying to be a teacher, I went to a lecture just as a one-off. Let's go and see what this lecture is about. And the lecture was with a professor from the University of Bath at the time called Dr. Janet Goodall. And she's one of the world leaders in researching parent-school relationships, parent-school engagement. There were some really obvious things that she said in that lecture that really landed. It was kind of, oh yeah, that it was really obvious. Some of the things, one of the things she said, parents care about their children. And I said, and it's just one of those things that you don't think about, but actually when you kind of like internalize that and really think about it, you say, yeah, actually, of course, the vast majority, 99.999% of parents care about their children. But when it comes to schools and kind of how a lot of the time teachers and school leaders and institutions can talk about parents, it's very much approaching it from a deficit position. So it's not celebrating parents for what they can bring to the relationship and what they do bring to their child's education and how we can look to support parents in that way, but what the misconceptions and stereotypes of parents can be if they don't do what the school asks them to do. For example, if a parent, for whatever multitude of reasons, does not come to parents' night, it's not because they don't care about their child. Whereas on many occasions, I have heard professionals say, Mrs. So-and-so didn't come to parents' night, same as always, she must not care about X child. Which, as I said, 99.999% of the time could probably not be further from the truth. There are just additional barriers. There are the vast majority of the times legitimate reasons as to why that parent has not come along. So we need to think about that more carefully and be asking better questions around why parents are maybe not able to get as involved and engaged as they would like.
I love that so much. I can't mention the name of the school, but our boys used to go to a different school. And the experience we had there compared to what we have now, that we live in Scotland, that's night and day, no? And we saw it perfectly what you just described. Yeah,
Sure.
the previous school, there was no understanding in terms of, like, say, I was late with them for school when I was away, say, for the week. So I was along with 3 boys. It was beyond hard. So there was no compassion, no empathy, like, oh, are you okay? Can we help you? But I was told off like a little child, yeah? I was in tears actually that day. So I completely can relate to what you're saying. And now we couldn't be happier with the approach. So it makes such a big difference now in everything because then you need to be happy as a parent as well. It's not just about kids, as horrible as it sounds. It's all connected, isn't it?
Yeah, it is all connected. It's really that triangle between the parents, the child, and the school, the teachers. But I really think what was kind of being experienced there potentially was not that the school were going against you necessarily. It's that schools are required. It's different in Scotland and England. In England, there's these kind of incentives to chase, and incentives is really the wrong word because incentive implies that there's a positive at the end of it. but the incentive is get your child into school or we will fine you.
Yeah, I
Or
was going
in
to
the
ask you.
extreme, we'll put you to court and you might go to jail.
Yeah,
And for families where attendance to school is a real issue, tend to be families who are facing systemic and societal barriers, including poverty, eviction from their homes. So actually, attendance to school, as much as it is very important, is not the top of that parent's list that day. It's about, how do I put food on the table? How do I get temporary accommodation for my family to make sure there's a roof over our heads tonight? So there needs to be, I guess, like more of a wider understanding of the challenges that schools are facing. So I do need to be clear that it's not finger pointing at the school saying, you're treating parents badly and you're not trying hard when it comes to working with parents. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is there needs to be kind of better understanding on a system basis in terms of these kind of targets that we're chasing in terms of attendance. It seems to really be only the things that we can measure that we find important. And by keeping track of attendance, that implies that if a child is in school, it means they're learning and it means that they're engaged. And attendance does not mean learning. It doesn't mean engagement. Okay, it might increase the chances of, but there are lots of opportunities for children to learn and to be educated if mainstream school is not the right setting for them.
Yeah, it's like with jobs, no? When your employer requires you to be there 9 to 5, it doesn't matter if you actually do something. You have to sit there because that's the rule. And I'm glad you explained that because I didn't know that this was the case. So you say basically teachers are under pressure as well. So it's not personal, or there's not that they are bad people or they're weird. They're under pressure just as much as we are.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I am astounded by the idea that a lot of teachers are also parents. So it's that thing of like, can we try and wear two hats at the same time? And sometimes we can't do that. It's like, you've got to implement these rules as a professional, as the school tells you to. You've got to toe the party line. But schools are very much under pressure in terms of funding, additional expectations. There is that, same usual story of, oh, well, teachers get 6 weeks off in the summer holidays. So, that's a great job. But, teaching is a very challenging job. And, people who maybe have the opinion that teaching is easy, I would ask them to spend time in the classroom and see how you get on. But no, teachers are trying their best. A lot of the time when there's like a societal ill to be fixed, a lot of the time it is put onto schools. I think like teeth brushing is one of the examples I can think of. When children are found to have poor dental health, schools and local authorities are asked to hire assistants who can come in and insist and work with children to get them to brush their teeth. And the children at that point need help then and there. They need help. So yes, okay, it's great. But I feel there's just these like wider, bigger issues that I think need to be tackled, which are not overnight. They're not overnight things that are going to be fixed.
Of course.
But like things like more funding, better systems, better processes. It's got to be. There's got to be improvements. Otherwise, it's not going to get any better.
So with your work, you're on a mission to change that, and to improve the system.
Do there are lots of people who are doing similar work to what I do in various different ways, but we tend to all work in silos. We tend to all work individually, and there's almost like a protectionism, a territorial kind of thing of this is my corner kind of thing. But I'm very much for there's a piece of the pie for everybody, if you like. There are enough schools, there are enough children, there are enough parents that need help that we can all do it. And I'm really grateful to be part of a few collaborations actually that, are working together to try and change the narrative around education generally. And when we're not seeing that kind of centralized change from government, you've got people who are out there trying to make changes that little bit quicker because they need to, and just challenging the status quo that we have at the moment.
So I would love to know your opinion on dealing with racist comments or, because this is something that happens a lot now. The child says something to another child and the school deals with it. But we had an experience, thankfully not our children yet, but we heard that from many other interracial couples that say the school didn't handle these situations very well just because they don't understand racism properly. They don't understand the background behind it. So what are your views on that? Or how can schools improve this aspect.
Mm. I mean, like for your listeners who are maybe just listening through audio, like I'm a white male, so it's, it's something that I can't empathize with. It's something that, I can understand, try to understand the hurt that it brings and, the kind of historical, hurt
Yeah.
that it can bring um to people of color. But schools need to follow their processes. A lot of the time I find actually that when schools have got a written policy and agreement around what needs to be done in these circumstances, a lot of the time it falls down because they don't follow it. They don't do what they say they're going to do. Yeah, there's not that understanding. And I can also understand as well that you'll have schools where there are people of color in a community in larger numbers, and then what you've got is maybe teachers who are kind of almost like parachuting into the school community every day, and they're not actually living within the community that they're working in because they're coming from areas outside. So there's a lack of understanding potentially of what the community is, what the culture of that community is, and essentially how people live. And I can understand that families might say, well, you don't live where we live and you don't understand our needs. So how do you, when you're commuting an hour and a half into our community every day, how do you actually know what it's like to live the way our community does? And how do you know about the barriers that we face and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
But it's interesting around when young children make ill-informed comments about things. Where is that coming from? Are they seeing it online? Is it something that they're hearing at home? But do we punish children for things that they maybe didn't know were incorrect? Or in a school community, do you get a kind of light telling off that actually it's a learning opportunity?
Yeah.
I've had lessons before where students would make ill-informed comments, and I teach biology. So if that happens, biology goes out the window for the rest of that lesson, and we actually talk about the issue that came up at that point, because there's that kind of zero tolerance element to it, but it's not unless it's like overtly racist. And, at that point it would be like, stand outside and I'll get back to you in a second. Is there a learning opportunity in that moment for the rest of the class? And I would say the same thing for things like sexism and homophobia.
Exactly.
If there is a learning opportunity there to speak to the rest of the class around why that statement or that comment was incorrect, there's an element of professional judgment around it. Is that the right time to do it? How is the child going to respond if you kind of stop the whole class and say, what was wrong with that comment, kind of thing. But sometimes it is necessary to actually you slam on the brakes at that point and you go, no biology for the rest of that lesson.
Yes.
Now we're going to talk about this because we cannot let comments go unnoticed. And then what that then maybe says to the rest of the class in terms of a student said that and it wasn't addressed and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, I hope that answers your question in a roundabout way.
I love that. I 100% agree. It's about deciding what's more important in that moment, isn't it? And like you said, the system isn't perfect in terms of flexibility. Sometimes you just have to go with the flow and adjust rather than no, we have to do biology right now, so we can't talk about this because, as an example, So I think what the system needs is more flexibility, and more open minds, if that's the right way to put it.
And learning and training.
And learning and training, exactly.
No.
Education, yeah.
Yeah, I think education for the staff particularly, because if you've got a school where the staff body is predominantly white, there would be a kind of reluctance to actually dive in and speak to a class about challenges, and issues to do with race and sex and gender, because staff don't want to get into any more trouble. There's kind of that walking on eggshells, that kind of tiptoeing around the issue. If teachers are given almost like an acceptable level of kind of training or statements or confidence capacity, kind of like to handle those issues, then, it means that those issues can be challenged there and then, because sometimes it does need to be challenged there and then. It can't really wait for the end of the day, or whatever it might be. So I think training about different cultures and things is super important.
I agree 100% with that, and I would like to add what you actually said already, that this goes for any issues, not just race. It's like you said, also but also like sexism. If say someone was abused in the past, how do you deal with that? So it's so many things we need better education on. It's like with race in particular, I would have handled it as a teacher, say 10 years ago, horrible, or even as a parent. I have a better understanding now, but this wasn't the case a few years ago. So, like, is it feasible that the education will be better for schools and for the staff in schools?
In terms of kind of
progression development and things for teachers, like I think we've seen.
It depends on what schools are doing in terms of like how they allocate their budgets. How do they, what's on their school improvement plan? What has the Department for Education, what has the inspectorate or the local authority said the school needs to improve on? And the school has a finite amount of money to spend on training. And it's really up to the leadership in the school to decide, where is this money going? Like what is the priority? And there's got to be decisions around that. And teachers have got a finite amount of time every year allocated to professional development as well. So there'll be, if it's a state-run school, for example, there'll be an agreement between the unions and the local authority around, these are the number of hours teachers teach in a year, this is how much time they have for development, this is how much time they have for meetings. So it's very granular in terms of how it's broken down. So there'll be senior leadership teams who are probably at this point actually in the year planning what professional development for their whole staff is going to look like for the 26-27 academic year. So it comes down to budgets, and it comes down to time and what the school sees as a priority at that moment. I would say that it's probably more likely to come about. Training's more likely to come about if an issue's happened, and then it's like a reactive thing as opposed to a proactive thing. If there has been a rise in racist comments, sexist comments, homophobic comments in classes, in WhatsApp groups, on social media, in that particular school community, then the leadership team go, actually, maybe we need to do a bit of training on this. So then they get, like an outside facilitators most likely to come in and do sessions. And there are really great organizations out there, like Show Racism, the Red Card, for example, that come into schools and do a lot of great work. And there are a few kind of independent people that I'm connected with too that do lots of great work in this space for staff. So as I say, it comes down to budget and it comes down to time, but there is potential.
I think it's easy for us to say, oh, they should do this, they should do that, but we don't have all the information on what pressure they're under as well. So I'm very glad we talk about it, because now I personally have much better understanding about certain things. We can't just say they should do this, they should do that. Who am I to say,
Yeah.
And we don't know what's behind the scenes, happening behind the scenes.
So obviously we all come with our biases. We've all got, the cultural kind of side of how we were taught, how we learn. And, I appreciate that obviously teachers go in and they're professional entities that are there to do. But there's certain things that you bring to yourself, and that can be, in some cases, absolutely amazing, because it's sometimes those things that catches the pupil and inspires someone to kind of learn more and things. But again, on the flip side of that, if there's the thing that kind of occurs and it rubs people up the wrong way, when you have those kind of situations that, you were talking about getting that kind of relationship between the parents and the teachers, if they're coming with those biases and saying, well, that person hasn't been because they weren't at parents' evening 2-3 times in a row, how do you move that forward? You obviously have to try and build the relationship with the parent in some form. If that teacher per se can't do that, what's the kind of steps that are in place to kind of bridge that? And do you or your body, teacher's body, do they turn around and try and work with the teachers to kind of improve getting that closer kind of relationship? Are those processes and things in place?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that when it comes to parent-school relationships, certainly it's got to be about a school's culture. If you've got a couple of teachers in the school who are very passionate about parent engagement and they are kind of banging the drum for parent engagement and how important it is, it's unlikely that there's going to be this kind of wholesale school change because you've just got a couple of people who are behind it.
Yeah.
You'll probably have different levels of how much people care about it or how much people think it's important. You'll have people who are really passionate about it, really think that parent voice is important and that, parents should have an active say in what happens in the school. People who are very like pro PTA and pro parent governors and all of that kind of thing. You'll have people in the middle who just kind of bob along and, they've got okay relationships with parents. And then you'll have teachers who are maybe longer served, who have maybe had no training whatsoever to do with working with parents, who are very school centric and, still enjoy the thought of bringing back the days when the parent just did what the school asked.
Yeah.
And, there are things that the school knows what to do and they know what to do in the best interest of their child. Otherwise, everybody would just homeschool. Everybody would just do things themselves. So there must be things that schools do know better, I guess, on how to do it, apart from it being the law as well that they have to go to school. But the school it's definitely a cultural thing. It has to be a cultural thing. It comes from the top. The head teacher has to care about parent engagement, for this to happen. It's amazing. You said you were based in Scotland now, and, parent engagement's actually been built into Scottish law for a long time. So it's actually, we had the Parental Involvement Act that came in 2006. There's maybe question marks over how it needs to probably be developed because that's nearly 20 years ago now. And parent-school partnerships is one of the kind of main sections of a document called How Good Is Our School, which is one of the main documents that it sets out school standards essentially.
Yeah.
And schools should be meeting those standards and following them. And if schools were genuinely able to follow all of those standards, then I would be out of a job. There would be no need for the work that I'm doing. And it was actually really encouraging as well to see there was the white paper that recently came out in England from the UK government around parent engagement and that want for to be better connections between schools and parents. However, there was one element of it that said if parents' engagement was lacking, schools would be made aware of the powers that they have to mandate engagement. And I'm not quite sure what that looks like, but words like mandate
Exactly. That doesn't
are
sound the
not
greatest.
what I
Yeah.
would be running with. And, are we going to go down the lines of, well, if you don't engage, then we're going to fine you, send you to court and potentially put you to jail, the same as is with attendance. And I just think that kind of power imbalance is where things are going wrong. So like there are things in the new white paper that are laudable and the mission is positive, but the nuts and bolts of how we actually go about it don't seem to be quite on the button
Same.
yet.
Right. If you've got a situation and sorry, I'm
No,
you okay?
go.
If you have a situation and it's say the student there is absolutely connected with the school, doing really well, doing what they need to do, but there is absolutely no engagement. Whether they were to go through the nuts and bolts of going through this whole process of the fines and so forth and things, what happens in that case there? Or is it so much that it goes to like the social kind of aspect, the social services type? Yeah. Does it get to that point? Have you ever had an experience similar to something like that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that you make. A lot of the time, challenges when it comes to parent-school partnerships come around when they are flagged when a child isn't doing well. So they're flagged when the child is not coming to school. They're flagged
Yeah.
when a child is not doing well academically or emotionally. And there is an attempt from the school to contact families and families are not engaging as much as the school would like them to. So a lot of the time, that's where that contact comes about. But I hear what you're saying in terms of like the other end of the scale.
Yeah.
The child is doing well academically. However, when the school is contacting home, there's nothing, there's nothing. And, I've worked internationally as well, where the families that went to the school were relatively wealthy
Yeah.
and, were paying school fees, etc. And there was parents who were jet setting around the world and the child was in that school. And there was there's that other end of the scale that's referred to as like affluent neglect, the idea that you don't
I've done what I need to
really
do.
get.
I've given you the money. You get
Yes,
on with it.
exactly. Yeah. And, like I had an example of a 15-year-old child who had their own apartment in the city while their parents went and traveled the world, and I think they did have family friends that kind of like dropped in
Yeah.
and checked in and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. The child wasn't completely on their own,
Yeah.
but I feel like having a run of an apartment on your own at 15 is quite significant. I think a lot of parents would think twice before leaving their 15-year-old full time in charge of an apartment.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of differences, I suppose. And I think you're right. There's not the same level of attention, I probably wouldn't say,
Yeah.
to scenarios where a child is doing well and the parents are not connected, or there's a sense that parents are not and the school are not connected, because a
Yeah.
lot of the time it's spent contacting families when things are not going well. And I think
Exactly.
that actually feeds into the idea why parent school partnerships are poor in some cases, because schools are only ever contacting home when there's an issue.
Yeah.
Schools need to contact more when there's things to celebrate, when there's things to be praised, and when things are going well, which a lot of schools do.
Yeah.
But that's maybe come after a period of time where the school didn't do that. So the trust has broken down with that family. The trust has been eroded, and it'll take time for that to be built back up again.
I ask just one more?
Yeah.
If you had a mission statement, what is it that you want to put out to the world in what you do in your doctoral kind of learning and thing? What's the impact that you want to kind of make?
I mean, so my kind of mission is to really work with schools to get them to rethink their practice, so what they do day to day, but ultimately to reshape school culture when it comes to building stronger parent-school partnerships and really taking an asset-based approach to parent partnerships. What are parents bringing to the table? What do they have the ability to do? What do they have the time to get involved in? What are we setting up parent communities for success when it comes to getting involved with their child and their child's learning? Because when we're saying parents are not coming to parents' evening, they're not replying to emails, they're not doing X, Y, and Z, they're not reading the newsletter, all of these things are set up operationally to work in favour of the school.
Yeah.
They're set up so that it can be done within the confines of the working day.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, parents cannot manage because they are working full time. A lot of families working multiple jobs to get an income to support their families. So there needs to be more flexibility for families in terms of how they can access the school. There needs to be kind of a kind of co-designed, I think, set of expectations around this is what we'll do as a school. We would love it if you could try and do these things as a parent.
Yeah.
But we understand that it's not always possible. And I'm a big person on empathy. I think empathy is so important, because ultimately we're all trying to achieve our daily goals and our yearly goals or life goals or whatever it might be. But we're all human at the end of the day, and there are things that happen in our lives that you just need to show people a little bit of grace sometimes and a little bit of understanding as to what their situation is and help them as best you can. There will be occasions, of course, where people, it's almost like give them an inch, take them, they run a mile type situation. Like, I understand that. But I think a lot of the time families who are facing challenges they're almost just like being pelted with challenge after challenge after challenge. And families just need a bit of empathy and a bit of support sometimes. So as I say, bringing that kind of asset-based bit to the table rather than those throwaway comments of they didn't turn up to parents' night again, oh, that's typical them. Like that kind of thing. It's asking the right questions really around why is that family not coming? And one of my real pet peeve statements is hard to reach families. Schools will and it's in documentation as well. It's in policy, it's in documents that you'll see all over the place when it comes to schools. It's talking about hard to reach families. And I would ask schools to flip that around and ask, who is hard to reach? Is it the school that's hard to reach?
Yeah.
What makes it difficult for the parents to get involved in the life of the school? I remember I went for an interview for a job as a like a guidance teacher, like as a pastoral leader, and I didn't get the job, which I'm now glad I didn't, because the feedback from that interview was I didn't use phrases like hard to reach. So I wasn't using these buzzwords. I wasn't. But for me, hard to reach is this deficit term. Whereas I would ask schools to consider if actually they, as an organization, their processes, their systems, the way that they work, that is the thing that's hard to reach, not the families.
So ideally should be less about ticking boxes and more about people. No,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
to sum it up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Just one last thing before we let you go.
Sure.
Homeschooling. What are your views on homeschooling? It's very popular now these days. And do you know Simon Squibb?
I have heard of Simon Squibb, but I don't know him personally.
He's on a very similar mission than you to change the education system.
Yeah.
And he's a big supporter of homeschooling. I'm not really, to be honest. I'm not saying I don't like it. It's just I think the school has many, many benefits that the child can't get when they're homeschooled. That's just my opinion. Not the ultimate truth. Yeah, social and confidence and being independent, all that. I would love to know your views on homeschooling.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, for the last 6 years, I've been involved in the online schooling space. Kind of pre-COVID, I was the principal or the head teacher of an online school that grew from around 250 students when I joined in 2019, and it had around 1,600 students when the company was sold in 2022. So there was a real uptick in the number of families who, for ideological reasons, were joining the school. They just liked the idea of having the flexibility around online schooling. So it was very much what a mainstream physical school, bricks and mortar school, we called it, offered. But it was in the online setting, and it allowed a bit of independent learning as well as like live in class time. Mainstream school does not work for everybody. I joke when I say, the Victorians would be proud of how we run our schools at the moment, in terms of how we learn, because in schools we still learn in rows. We still learn in these like rows of children. And is that education? Is that what we want the future of education to look like, is still to be teaching how we taught in the 1800s, and what does education look like? So yeah, that kind of space doesn't work for everybody. Being in a classroom of 30, 33, 35 students at a time, there are children with lots of additional needs. The number of children that are being diagnosed with special educational needs and disabilities is increasing. And it's right that the children who need support are given support, but ultimately sometimes the system lets them down and they don't get the support that they need. So parents will quite often say, do you know what? We're going to look for an alternative because we're not getting the support that we need. So there is a significant proportion of online schools who have lots of children with special educational needs and disabilities, because it offers a level of flexibility in terms of timing, where children can watch recorded lessons so they can catch up and they can do things in their own time. If they need to sleep in the morning or they need to get rest during the day, it just provides that level of flexibility. And in terms of like the socialization aspect, because that's something that parents do worry about, when they're joining online schools, is how is my child going to be fulfilled socially? How are they going to have friends, be involved in things? But actually, a lot of families that I've worked with in the past have said that their children are more socially fulfilled now than they were previously, because they're not in school from 8 till 4. There are opportunities during the day that they can get involved in. There could be classes at lunchtime they can go to, whether it's sporting or whether it's acting or whatever it might be. We had children in the schools that I worked in who were professional sports people, they were professional actors, you know, they were on the West End, they were in films and TV and that kind of thing. You know, so that was like really helpful for them in terms of being able to continue on an education as well as do the thing that they were passionate about. So I suppose in terms of homeschooling as such, it depends on the quality of education that the child is receiving, but that'll differ depending on what the parent wants for their child. You know, is academia important? How many subjects do they want their child to do? You know, there's also, I know like my dad back in the 70s, you know, 60s and 70s, you know, he went to almost like a Montessori type school, you know, like the Steiner school, I think it was, you know, something where it was very free learning, you know, it wasn't come into the classroom and learn what the syllabus tells you. It was very much, you know, my understanding of it is limited, but there was a lot more kind of free reign and you learn as you go and you choose what you learn and all of that kind of thing. So I guess it comes down to people's philosophies around what they think education is, but the main thing is that the child is set up for success later, you know. And, you know, as a teacher, maybe this doesn't come across well, but sometimes like academics is not everything. You know, like when I was at school, going to university was like the ultimate aim. Like if you didn't go to university, then you failed. You know, like if you didn't go from sixth form or S6 up to straight to university, that was a fail. You know, so that was always the goal, you know, and going to college or, you know, that just wasn't, you know, if you went to college, you weren't smart, you know, or if you went for an apprenticeship, you weren't smart, you know, and that's just really not the case. You know, there are opportunities in life for further study when you're a mature student. And like, you know, gosh, if I could have got my qualifications like via an apprenticeship or like a kind of earn as you learn kind of situation where I was getting a wage as well as being able to get my qualifications, I would have loved that because you're able to support yourself and learn. You've not got a student loan racking up. You've not got tuition fees to pay. I was very fortunate to be educated in Scotland, so I didn't have to pay those tuition fees. But why would you run up bills of £75,000 to £100,000, you know, for your degree if you could do an apprenticeship, come out with a job at the end of it potentially, and have the qualifications? So, you know, it's great that you can see more opportunities coming about for young people, which is great. Yeah. Online schooling isn't for everybody either. I don't think there are any online schools out there who testify that that is the case, but it is certainly filling a need that is fulfilling a need that isn't being fulfilled by the mainstream system.
Yeah, I think, yeah, like you said, it depends. We can't say it's good or it's bad. But yeah, it depends on so many factors, and there is no right or wrong here.
Yeah.
There are things about how homeschooling I didn't realize. You just clarified. So thank you very much. I think many people don't fully understand what it is now. They just picture themselves sitting with the child for 8 hours, learning. So that wouldn't be feasible. And also, like, how do they do it when you have to be at home as a parent then with the child, don't you? So you can't work, you can't go out. So then how does that impact your mental well-being? Say, so it's.
I'd be happy to join you for another episode and we can talk about that.
Thank you so much. This
No
has
problem.
been up to us, and I believe to our listeners and viewers.
Brilliant.
So if you enjoyed this episode, I don't know why I didn't lean back earlier. It's so much more comfortable.
As you do.
So if you enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe, comment, share it with someone you think you would enjoy it as well. Leave us a comment, subscribe, and we need more subscribers so more people can discover the show. I just said everything. Like, comment, share, and whatever you want to do. You can troll if you want to. It's more comments.
Likes. Brilliant. Feel free to troll us. Let's put that out into the universe.
It's perfect, I think, now, because who would troll someone who asks for trolling? No, I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
It's like when you leave the house open, who would break in?
Yeah.
No, it's the same. So feel free to do whatever you want. Where did we get?
Thank you so much.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
See you later. Oh, you want more than that, do you? No, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you very soon.
Take care, everybody. Bye.